On a routine morning in Chicago, two officers pulled over a woman, confident they could intimidate her into submission. They searched her car without cause, handcuffed her, and charged her with resisting arrest. But what they didn't know? She was a federal prosecutor, someone who knew the law better than they did. Now, she has the power to fight back. How will she turn the tables on the system that tried to silence her? Stay tuned to find out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Aaliyah Brooks had always prided herself on being meticulous. It was a trait that had served her well in her legal career, ensuring that every case she handled was airtight. That morning, as she stepped out of her apartment in downtown Chicago, she had no reason to believe that her day would take a turn for the worse. She had a meeting scheduled with a fellow DOJ attorney across town, and instead of taking the subway as usual, she opted to drive. She had cases to review, calls to make, and having her car gave her more flexibility. Sliding into the driver's seat of her sleek black sedan, Aaliyah exhaled, savoring the quiet before the chaos of work. She turned on her favorite R&B playlist and eased into the morning traffic. The streets of Chicago bustled with the usual energy, people hurrying to work, coffee cups in hand, taxis weaving between lanes, the occasional cyclist darting through. She tapped her fingers against the steering wheel, in rhythm with the beat, her mind already running through the points she wanted to discuss in her meeting. As she approached an intersection, the traffic light flicked from green to yellow. She slowed down, making sure she didn't push it. The moment she crossed the intersection, red and blue flashing lights flooded her rearview mirror. Sirens, a cop car. Aaliyah's heart rate spiked, her fingers instinctively tightening around the wheel. She checked her speedometer. She hadn't been speeding. She hadn't made an illegal turn. She hadn't done anything wrong. Taking a slow breath, she did what she had been taught to do since she was a teenager. Keep her hands visible on the steering wheel, turn off the engine, and wait. Two officers exited the patrol car. One was tall and broad-shouldered, his face set in a permanent scowl. The other was younger, leaner, but carried himself with an air of arrogance. They approached her car, one standing on each side. The older officer, whose name tag read Wilkins, rapped his knuckles against the driver's side window. Aaliyah rolled it down slowly. "License and registration," he said without preamble. His tone was cold, commanding, as if she were already guilty of something. Aaliyah nodded calmly, reaching into her glove compartment for her registration, while pulling her wallet from her bag. "May I ask why I'm being stopped, officer?" Wilkins barely spared her a glance as he took the documents. "You were driving erratically," he said dismissively. Aaliyah frowned. "Erratically?" The younger officer, Mercer, leaned in from the passenger side. "You rolled through that yellow light back there." Aaliyah's jaw clenched. A yellow light was not illegal to cross. She knew that. And erratic driving. That was an excuse too vague to hold up. She took a controlled breath. "I don't believe I violated any traffic laws. I slowed down at the intersection as required." Wilkins exhaled sharply, as if he were already losing patience. "Are you questioning me?" Aaliyah met his gaze evenly. "I'm simply asking for clarification." Mercer scoffed, exchanging a glance with his partner. "These people always have something to say," he muttered under his breath. A flicker of heat ignited in Aaliyah's chest. These people. She had heard that phrase too many times in her life, spoken in that same condescending tone. "Stay calm, Aaliyah." Wilkins handed back her license, but held on to her registration. "Step out of the car." Her stomach twisted. "Excuse me?" "Step outside. Office the car." Aaliyah hesitated. Officer, unless you have probable cause, I don't believe you have the right to. Wilkins' face hardened. You're resisting now. Mercer's hand drifted toward his holster. Aaliyah saw it, and a chill ran down her spine. This was exactly how situations spiraled. She had read the statistics, seen the videos, knew the tragic stories of those who didn't make it home from encounters like this. Slowly, deliberately, she unlocked the door and stepped out, keeping her hands visible. A small crowd had started to gather on the sidewalk. A few pedestrians slowed their pace, sensing something wasn't right. Wilkins grabbed her wrist roughly, spinning her around toward the hood of her car. Hands on the car, he ordered. Aaliyah swallowed her anger and complied. She heard Mercer rifling through her vehicle. This is illegal. She could feel the weight of onlookers' stares. She wanted to speak, to demand her rights, but she also knew the delicate line she walked. Any protest, any resistance, real or imagined, could escalate this. Stay calm. Stay in control. A voice rang out from the sidewalk. Hey, that's not right. Aaliyah turned slightly and caught sight of a woman holding up her phone, recording. She was young, maybe in her early 20s, with a determined look in her eyes. Wilkins glanced at her and sneered. Mind your business, ma'am. This is my business, the woman shot back. She didn't do anything wrong. Mercer chuckled. Social justice warriors, always looking for trouble. Wilkins yanked Aaliyah's arms behind her back and slapped the cold steel of handcuffs around her wrists. You're under arrest for obstruction of justice and resisting an officer. The words hit Aaliyah like a punch. Obstruction? Resisting? The crowd murmured in shock. She didn't resist anything, someone called out. But none of it mattered. She was already being led toward the patrol car. As they pushed her inside, Aaliyah lifted her chin, swallowing the burn of humiliation. She could fight this. She would fight this. And these officers had no idea who they had just messed with. Aaliyah Brooks sat stiffly in the back of the police cruiser, her wrists aching from the too tight handcuffs. The weight of what had just happened pressed on her like a lead blanket. She had done nothing wrong. She had complied. And yet, she was here, treated like a criminal. She took a steadying breath as the officers drove through the streets of Chicago, heading toward the precinct. Outside, the city hummed along, as if nothing was amiss. Pedestrians walked by, cabs honked, businesses opened for the day. But inside that car, Aaliyah felt like she had stepped into an alternate reality, one where her education, her position, and her rights meant nothing. Her phone, confiscated, her car, left abandoned on the street. She was powerless, at least for now. The cruiser pulled up to the 12th District Precinct, and the officers yanked her out, leading her through the front entrance. Heads turned as she was escorted past the front desk. Some officers barely glanced at her. Others smirked, their expressions a mix of amusement and indifference. At booking, she was ordered to remove her jewelry and empty her pockets. The intake officer, an older black man with weary eyes, watched her with something close to pity. Name? He asked, glancing at the form in front of him. Aaliyah Brooks. His pen hovered over the paper, recognition flickering in his eyes. The lawyer? She nodded. That's me. For a brief moment, he hesitated, as if debating whether to say something more. Then, his professional mask slipped back into place. You have a lawyer you want to call? Aaliyah exhaled. Yes. Michael Carter. The officer handed her a phone. Her fingers shook as she dialed the number, but she quickly steadied herself. After 2 rings, Michael's voice came through, groggy but alert. Brooks? What's going on? Aaliyah's voice was clipped, controlled. I've been arrested. A pause. Then sharp and urgent. What? For what? They're claiming obstruction and resisting arrest. Michael cursed under his breath. Tell me everything. Who arrested you? Two officers, Wilkins and Mercer. Another pause. Then Michael's voice hardened. I know those names. They've had complaints before. That sent a ripple of both relief and anger through her. Relief because she wasn't the first, which meant this pattern could be exposed. Anger because it was still happening. Sit tight. I'll be there in 20 minutes, Michael said. And don't say a word to anyone. Aaliyah handed the phone back, and the booking process continued. Mugshot, fingerprints. The humiliation burned under her skin, but she held her head high. Aaliyah had barely slept in the holding cell. The morning light trickled through the small barred window when an officer came to escort her to her arraignment. By the time she stepped into the courtroom, her lawyer, Michael Carter, was already there, standing tall in his navy blue suit. His expression was one of barely restrained fury. Judge David Calloway presided over the hearing, his reputation preceding him. Tough on defendants, deferential to law enforcement. As she took her seat beside Michael, she spotted the two officers sitting smugly at the prosecution's table, flanked by Assistant District Attorney Claire Reynolds. Aaliyah studied Reynolds. She had seen her name before, famous for protecting police officers in questionable cases. She was not going to let this case slip away. The court clerk called the case. The State of Illinois versus Aaliyah Brooks. Judge Calloway adjusted his glasses. Miss Brooks, you are charged with resisting arrest and obstruction of justice. How do you plead? Michael spoke before she could. Not guilty, Your Honor. Calloway nodded. Let's hear from the prosecution. Ada Reynolds stood, her tone professional but condescending. Your Honor, on the morning in question, the defendant was lawfully stopped for a traffic violation. When officers attempted to issue a citation, she became uncooperative, verbally aggressive, and refused to exit her vehicle. The officers, fearing for their safety, removed her from the car. She continued to be combative, leading to her arrest. Aaliyah clenched her jaw. Lies. Michael leaned forward. Your Honor, we have video evidence that directly contradicts this account. The defendant complied with all orders. At no point did she resist. The officers escalated the situation without probable cause. Reynolds barely blinked. Video evidence from where? A bystander's shaky cell phone footage. Michael smirked. Actually, Your Honor, we have multiple witnesses willing to testify, and the footage clearly shows my client cooperating. The claim that she was aggressive is entirely fabricated. Judge Calloway sighed. Let me see the video. Michael handed over a USB, and a court officer played the footage on a screen for the room. The video was short, but it was damning. It showed Aaliyah standing calmly by her car, while Officer Wilkins searched her vehicle without cause. It showed her hands clearly visible at all times. It captured Mercer's mocking remarks about these people, and it showed Wilkins twisting her arms into cuffs while she stood completely still. When the video ended, an unsettling silence filled the courtroom. Judge Calloway's face was unreadable. He cleared his throat. Ada Reynolds, any response? Reynolds straightened her blazer. Your Honor, while this video may show one angle, it doesn't capture the entirety of the stop. Officers Wilkins and Mercer have clean records. Their word holds weight. Michael scoffed. Actually, Your Honor, that's not entirely true. He slid a stack of papers onto the judge's bench. These officers have multiple complaints filed against them for excessive force and racial profiling. None were properly investigated. Judge Calloway frowned. Ms. Reynolds, is this true? Reynolds hesitated. Your Honor, none of these complaints resulted in disciplinary action. Michael didn't miss a beat. Because internal affairs dismissed them, that doesn't mean they didn't happen. A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. Aaliyah kept her expression composed, but inside, she felt the shift. The judge sighed. I'll take this under advisement. Bail is set at $25,000. Aaliyah's stomach clenched, but Michael was already pulling out his phone. We're posting bail now, Your Honor. Calloway banged his gavel. Next case. As they exited the courtroom, Aaliyah turned to Michael. They're not dropping this. Michael nodded grimly. No, but we're just getting started. They have no idea who they're dealing with. Aaliyah exhaled slowly, straightening her blazer notes. She was ready for the fight. The courthouse was silent, except for the sound of shuffling papers and the occasional murmur of attorneys preparing their cases. Aaliyah Brooks sat at the defense table, her hands clasped together, her expression unreadable. Next to her, Michael Carter adjusted his tie, his sharp eyes scanning the room. Across from them, Ada Claire Reynolds stood beside Officers Wilkins and Mercer, both men looking far too confident for Aaliyah's liking. Judge David Calloway sat at the bench, his expression neutral, but she could sense his inclination. He was the type to believe officers over defendants. The hearing was set to determine whether the charges against her would proceed to trial. Despite the video evidence, despite witness testimony, Aaliyah could see it. The system was already leaning in favor of the police. Michael stood, clearing his throat. Your Honor, we've presented evidence that directly contradicts the officer's account of what happened during the traffic stop. The video clearly shows my client cooperating at every step. Ada Reynolds smirked. Your Honor, as I mentioned in the last hearing, a single phone video does not tell the whole story. Officers Wilkins and Mercer maintained that Miss Brooks was aggressive and confrontational. Michael crossed his arms. And yet, not a single moment of aggression is visible in the footage. Judge Calloway sighed. Miss Reynolds, do you have anything more substantial than their word? Reynolds straightened her blazer. Your Honor, these are decorated officers. They have undergone years of training in de-escalation tactics. If they felt threatened, that alone is enough cause for arrest. Aaliyah's blood boiled at that. They felt threatened? She had stood there calm, hands visible, following every order, and yet the burden of proof was on her, to prove she wasn't a threat. Judge Calloway exhaled, rubbing his temple. Let's hear from the defendant. Michael gave her a reassuring nod as Aaliyah stood and walked to the witness stand. She took a deep breath, locking eyes with Judge Calloway before speaking. Your Honor, I'd like to clarify a few things. Calloway motioned for her to continue. She turned slightly, facing Ada Reynolds and the officers. First, I did not resist arrest. Second, I did not obstruct justice. What I did was ask a question: why I was being pulled over. That's not a crime. Reynolds scoffed. Miss Brooks, the officers maintain that your tone. Aaliyah held up a hand, stopping her. Let's talk about that. She turned to the judge. Your Honor, at what point did asking a question become a crime? At what point did standing still and complying become resisting? The courtroom was silent. She continued. If I had been anyone else, if I had looked different, dressed differently, had a different skin tone, would we even be here? Reynolds frowned. Objection. Overruled, Calloway said, his eyes on Aaliyah. She took a breath. Your Honor, I'd also like to add one more piece of information. She turned slightly, letting her voice carry through the courtroom. I am an assistant U.S. attorney for the Northern District of Illinois. The words echoed through the room like a thunderclap. Wilkins and Mercer stiffened. Reynolds' jaw clenched. Even Judge Calloway faltered for a split second before regaining his composure. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Michael smirked slightly, folding his arms. Now that changes things, doesn't it? Reynolds quickly recovered. Your Honor, her position doesn't grant her immunity from the law. Aaliyah nodded. You're absolutely right, Miss Reynolds. My job does not make me immune, but it does mean that I know the law inside and out. And I know for a fact that what these officers did to me was unlawful. She turned to the judge. They searched my vehicle without probable cause. They detained me under false pretenses. They charged me with resisting arrest when I followed every command. If they did this to me, someone who knows their rights better than most, what are they doing to people who don't? Calloway's face remained neutral, but she saw it. Hesitation. Wilkins, previously smug, now looked uneasy. Mercer's fingers twitched. Michael stepped forward. Your Honor, this isn't just a case of wrongful arrest. This is an abuse of power. These officers thought they could get away with it because they assumed Miss Brooks was just another citizen without the means to fight back. But they were wrong. Judge Calloway drummed his fingers against his desk. I need time to review the evidence. Reynolds, desperate to regain ground, quickly spoke. Your Honor, even if she is a federal attorney, that doesn't change the facts. The charges should still stand. Michael scoffed. The facts? Or the fabricated police report? Calloway silenced them both with a look. We'll reconvene tomorrow. I want a full review of all evidence submitted. The gavel slammed, and just like that, the courtroom erupted into low whispers. Aaliyah turned, her eyes locking onto Wilkins and Mercer. They had underestimated her, but now they knew exactly who they were dealing with. The courtroom was still buzzing from the revelation. Aaliyah Brooks, the woman they had treated like just another defenseless civilian, was in fact an assistant U.S. attorney. The shift in energy was palpable. The smirks had faded from Officers Wilkins and Mercer's faces, replaced with thinly veiled nervousness. Judge Calloway, previously dismissive, now seemed suddenly careful. Aaliyah and Michael Carter walked out of the courtroom, surrounded by reporters who had caught wind of the case. Microphones and cameras were shoved in their direction, journalists shouting over each other. Miss Brooks, do you believe this was a racially motivated arrest? As a federal prosecutor, how will this impact your cases? Are you planning to sue the department? Michael stepped in, shielding Aaliyah. No comment. Aaliyah kept her head high, jaw set, and pushed past them. She wasn't going to fight this battle in the press, not yet. Later that afternoon, Aaliyah sat in a conference room at the Department of Justice, across from Vanessa Castillo, a senior official in the Civil Rights Division. Castillo, a no-nonsense woman in her 50s, tapped her manicured nails against the desk. This is a mess. Michael, seated beside Aaliyah, leaned forward. That's an understatement. Aaliyah exhaled. Vanessa, you know this isn't just about me. These officers have a history. There are multiple complaints against them that were ignored. How many other people have been railroaded by them? Castillo nodded. We've started looking into that. And you're right. There's a pattern. We're launching a formal civil rights investigation into the Chicago PD, and this precinct in particular. Aaliyah's stomach flipped. This was bigger than just her case now. Michael glanced at Aaliyah before turning back to Castillo. What about her charges? Castillo sighed. The judge hasn't ruled yet. But if this case goes any further, it's going to be a disaster. The DOJ can't directly intervene in a local case like this unless it crosses federal lines, but we can keep the pressure on. Aaliyah nodded. I'm not backing down. Castillo gave her a knowing look. Good, because things are about to get ugly. By the next morning, Detective Brian Costello from Internal Affairs was on the case. He sat across from Mercer in a dimly lit interrogation room at the precinct, flipping through a file. "So, Officer Mercer," Costello said, his tone casual. "Walk me through the stop again." Mercer shifted in his seat. "We pulled her over for erratic driving." Costello raised a brow. "Erratic? How?" "She rolled through a yellow light." Costello smirked. "That's not illegal." Mercer tensed. "She was questioning our authority." "Questioning your authority?" Costello leaned forward. "Or knowing her rights." Mercer's jaw clenched. "Look, Costello cut him off. "Here's what I think happened. You and Wilkins saw a black woman driving a nice car and decided to make her day harder. You assumed she'd get scared, roll over, and take whatever charges you threw at her. But you made a mistake. You messed with the wrong person." Mercer didn't respond. Costello continued. "There's an open investigation now. The DOJ is watching. If you and Wilkins falsified that police report, now's the time to come clean." Mercer swallowed hard. Meanwhile, in his chambers, Judge Calloway was having a tense conversation with ADA Reynolds. "This case isn't going away," Calloway muttered, pacing. "The DOJ is circling. The press is all over it." Reynolds folded her arms. "We still have a case." Calloway shot her a look. "Do we? Because from where I'm sitting, this is starting to look like a politically charged disaster." Reynolds exhaled. "We can still argue that she escalated the situation." "With what?" Calloway interrupted. "A video that shows her standing still. A bystander testimony that backs up her story. I don't like the way this is looking." Reynolds was silent for a moment before she admitted, "If this case collapses, the officers could be in serious trouble." Calloway rubbed his temples. "Or worse, this could turn into a civil rights lawsuit that drags this entire department through the mud." Reynolds finally caved. "What do you want to do?" Calloway exhaled. "We wait. But if more evidence comes to light, I'm not putting my career on the line for two cops who overplayed their hand." Later that day, the Chicago Police Department released a statement. "Officers Wilkins and Mercer have been placed on administrative leave, pending an internal review." Aaliyah read the statement on her phone and let out a breath. "Step 1. Michael grinned from across the table. "They're feeling the pressure." Aaliyah nodded. "Good, because we're just getting started." The tension in the courtroom was thick as Judge David Calloway prepared to issue his decision. Aaliyah Brooks sat at the defense table, her back straight, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She had spent her entire career in courtrooms like this, but never as the one sitting in the defendant's seat. Michael Carter, her attorney and closest ally in this battle, was beside her, tapping his pen against a legal pad. Across from them, Adia Claire Reynolds sat with her lips pressed into a thin line. She had fought hard to keep this case alive, but the weight of evidence against her argument was becoming impossible to ignore. Wilkins and Mercer sat behind her, their expressions unreadable. They had once exuded arrogance, believing they would walk away from this unscathed. But now, with a DOJ investigation, an internal affairs probe, and a civil rights lawsuit looming, they looked like men realizing they had made a fatal miscalculation. Judge Calloway cleared his throat. "After reviewing the evidence, including video footage and witness testimony, I find that the prosecution has failed to establish probable cause for these charges." The breath Aaliyah had been holding finally released. "Therefore, the charges against Miss Brooks are dismissed." A ripple of relief spread through the courtroom. Michael squeezed Aaliyah's shoulder lightly. But Calloway wasn't finished. He adjusted his glasses and continued. Furthermore, I am ordering that the arrest record of Miss Brooks be expunged. There shall be no criminal record associated with this incident. Aaliyah's jaw tightened. A small but necessary victory. The judge banged his gavel. Court adjourned. Instantly, the courtroom erupted in murmurs. Reporters scrambled to get their notes in order. Some members of the public, who had been following the case closely, clapped quietly before the bailiffs ordered them to leave. Michael turned to Aaliyah. It's over. She nodded, but a storm still brewed inside her. Not yet. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, microphones shoved in her face. Miss Brooks, what's your next step? Do you plan to take legal action against the officers? What does this ruling mean for cases of racial profiling? Aaliyah held up a hand, silencing the crowd. This case was never just about me. This is about holding officers accountable for abusing their power. If I didn't have the legal knowledge, the support system, and the resources, this could have ended very differently. Her voice was steady, but inside, she was furious. How many people before her had been silenced, bullied, or falsely accused, without the means to fight back? A few hours later, breaking news flashed across every media outlet. Chicago police suspend officers Wilkins and Mercer pending disciplinary action. Inside the precinct, Detective Brian Costello sat across from Mercer once again. You should talk, Costello said, voice even. Wilkins is already throwing you under the bus. Mercer paled. That's not true. Costello slid a folder across the desk. Inside were statements from previous complaints, allegations of excessive force, racial profiling, and fabricated police reports. These aren't just allegations anymore, Costello said. The DOJ is investigating. If they find out you falsified records, you're looking at federal charges. Mercer swallowed hard. I was just following Wilkins' lead. Costello smirked. Yeah? That's not what he's saying about you. Mercer's face fell. He knew it was over. Aaliyah sat in her office at the Department of Justice, staring at the latest email from Vanessa Castillo in the Civil Rights Division. The DOJ is officially launching a civil rights investigation into the Chicago PD for patterns of racial profiling and misconduct. She closed her eyes briefly. This was what mattered, not just her exoneration, but exposing the entire system that allowed these abuses to happen. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. Michael stepped inside, a small smirk on his lips. You've been busy. She sighed, leaning back in her chair. This is just the beginning. Michael nodded. You know, not every wrongful arrest gets a federal investigation. Aaliyah gave him a pointed look. That's exactly the problem. He studied her for a moment. So, what now? She exhaled, determination in her eyes. We keep pushing. Wilkins and Mercer aren't the only ones like this. The system is bigger than them. We have to change the rules. Michael grinned. Sounds like a war. She smirked. Then we better gear up. Weeks later, Chicago City Hall was packed for a town hall meeting. Community members, activists, and local officials gathered to discuss police accountability. Aaliyah stood at the podium, facing a crowd filled with anger, frustration, but also hope. She took a deep breath. This isn't just about bad officers. It's about a system that allows them to exist. A pause. It's about people who don't have the privilege to fight back like I did. It's about making sure that the next person who gets stopped doesn't have to fear for their life. Applause rippled through the room. Michael stood at the back, arms crossed, watching his friend step fully into her power. Wilkins and Mercer had underestimated her. So had the entire system. Now, they all knew exactly who they were dealing with, and she wasn't going anywhere. The story of Aaliyah Brooks is not just a legal battle. It is a powerful reminder of how knowledge, resilience, and accountability can challenge systemic injustice. Her experience teaches us several key lessons that we can apply in our daily lives. Know your rights. Aaliyah understood the law and used it to defend herself. Whether in a traffic stop, workplace dispute, or legal issue, having a clear understanding of your rights empowers you to stand up against wrongdoing. Document everything. Without video evidence and witness testimonies, Aaliyah's case could have gone differently. In an age where misinformation is rampant, recording and preserving evidence can make a crucial difference in seeking justice. Challenge the system. When necessary, corrupt systems thrive when people stay silent. Aaliyah's decision to fight back not only cleared her name, but also sparked an investigation into broader misconduct. If you see injustice, speak up. Change begins with individuals willing to take a stand. Community and support matter. Allies like Michael Carter and witness Tiffany Sanders played crucial roles in her fight. Building a network of support is essential, whether in legal battles or personal struggles. This story reminds us that justice isn't automatic. It must be fought for. The next time you witness injustice, ask yourself, will you stay silent, or will you stand up like Aaliyah did? Will you stand your ground, use your rights, and fight for the truth no matter the odds? 1. Or will you stay silent and compromise to avoid conflict, even if you know it's unfair? 2. Drop a comment with 1 or 2 below, and let me know what you would do. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories that challenge the system and inspire change.